limited because intellectual property rights systems are supposed to create an incentive for innovation. So they are supposed, to encourage people to innovate, to create new things. So problem is just that in the last 20, 30 years, we have seen a massive extension of intellectual property rights, because today you can put a patent or copyright on everything, and that is completely new. So, you can put a patent on plants, on mathematical algorithms, on human genes. And the problem with this is that today it is not so much the best ideas that succeed, but it's more very expensive lawyers that get through. And in the case of developing nations, that's even more urgent, because developing nations, they hardly own patents, they hardly own copyrights, and very important, they really lack the means to enforce them, because enforcing a patent, for example, is extremely costly. And in the end, this all means that computer jobs or technologies, they are only for people who, have the money to buy licenses and to buy the patents. As I pointed out, because free software, open source, is having very different models on intellectual property, so developing nations actually benefit from this very special concept that is behind it, because it's much more open. And now I have slides prepared that explain the actual advantages that free software offers, which proprietary software cannot offer. So first one is skill transfer. Since you have access to source code with GNU Linux, this offers interactive access to knowledge and information engineering skills of the most developed countries. So people from economically disadvantaged regions, they can learn locally and obtain new skills, and all of this at very, very low cost. And the philosophy and mechanisms of the free software community imply that someone who's a learner today can be a teacher tomorrow. And these newly learned skills, they can help to find a job or to sustain small businesses. And in addition, the so-called brain drain can be counteracted. And brain drain, that's a problem that all the developing nations suffer from. And this means that talented people, in this case programmers, they have to leave their home country because they cannot find adequate education facilities or jobs in their own countries, so they have to leave. But with open source, since you have this very special development model and everything, you just can take part on a very ambitious, software developing project and just stay in your country. Second point is price and total cost of ownership. So when we take, for example, a country like Vietnam, working with proprietary systems, so let's take Windows XP together with Office, that equals in a country like Vietnam maybe like 16, or that is worth of 16 months worth salary. And with GNU Linux, you just have the distribution costs. So critics argue all the time that installation and support, that costs a lot of money and that it's hard to calculate. So that is a point, but or why TCO is an issue. But we always have to take into account that developing nations, or in developing nations, labor is not a big cost factor. And much more importantly, you always can promote your local software market. And just never forget that proprietary software also needs support that is costly. Okay, then we have the complex of technological independence. I'll put that here, sorry. So a great proportion of proprietary software is developed in the richer world, so respectively controlled by their big corporations. Problem here is that the mere import of software intensifies the very dependencies which are supposed to be overcome. And this has all to do with the fact that software is a very special good. So it is more a process than a product. And in order to keep it usable, you need to develop it continuously. You need updates, you need upgrades, which means that support, updates, and upgrades, they have to be bought continuously. And in the proprietary software world, it is a fairly common business model to initially sell software at a loss or even to give it away for free in order to develop a user base. And then if you have this user base, prices just go up and the customers just cannot switch easily to other software solutions because the data is locked in the proprietary system. And so as a result, customers have to pay premium prices. And you do not have this problem by using free software, open source. Another advantage is that GNU Linux operating system, they run on pretty old computers. And problem with proprietary operating systems is, when you take Windows, they always rely on the newest processor generation. And therefore, they are pretty useless for owner of an older and therefore poorly performing IT infrastructure. And companies cease to offer support for older proprietary system, for older operating system. So that is like the case for Windows 95, Windows 98, Windows NT. But with free software, with open source, since source codes are available and provided that computer specialists are around that know the system, you can support the system as long as the hardware works. And this very costly race where the newest software requires the newest hardware, you just don't have to play this game now. Okay, so in this whole complex of technological independence, free standards, protocols, and data formats, they are very important because if you have openness, you have competition, which presents monopolistic tendencies, and that's good because then you have options and choices. Because monopolies, they're always equal dependencies, and that is actually what the poor countries are trying to get rid of. Localization, sorry. All right, so localization is another advantage open source offers, which proprietary software cannot offer, because I think we have on this planet close to 7,000 languages, and I don't know how many writing systems. And closed source software is only produced in those languages that promise to be economically profitable. And you cannot make changes concerning language because you do not have the source code. And so in the end, this closes computer jobs and certain technologies to people who, for example, understand English. And this also makes basic computer training difficult and sometimes expensive. So, and again, with free software, you have the source code, and so that offers the opportunity to translate the software into any language you need. The last 2 points, I'm going to make them quickly because that is not so very special on this whole digital divide issue. Security is an issue because free software, open source, does have a reputation of being more secure, and transparency is important. So this whole trusted or so-called trusted computing debate is important here, but because if you do not have the source code, so this makes software a black box, and you never can see if, for example, the right of privacy is violated, yes or no, or if everything is fine. And so with free software, you just can look everything up, and there will always be people, if something should be wrong, they will fix it. So in this sense, it is a very democratic kind of code. Okay, so now I mentioned some pretty impressive advantages why free software, open source does offer a lot of great advantages when it comes to bridging the digital divide. So how come that free software is definitely not mainstream? So what Brazil is doing here, that's clearly the exception of the rule. And then there are two very obvious reasons. The first one is that Microsoft was there first, of course, and most people are being born into a Windows world, and if you just take into account usability aspects, there's nothing wrong with Windows, but if you take into account some other issues, there are some things completely wrong with closed source or with Microsoft systems. The second pretty obvious reason is why open source is not mainstream in digital divide issues is that, of course, someone who's not having the financial means to buy the license, so he just used illegally copied software. So, and I believe that is not just a problem or a thing that people in developing nations do. So I know quite some Germans who choose the same way. And then there are lots of reasons that are not so obvious, but these reasons also explain why open source free software is not mainstream when it comes to these issues, and that is that software policy just serves as a blind spot. So the activists I talked to, they all reported of this very common experience that the people who take part in this policy issue, digital divide, they talk about everything. So how they are supposed to build up a physical IT infrastructure, or how they should, or how, you know, providing people with ICTs can help to promote democratization and living standards, but they just don't think of software. So they just never have thought about this whole software policy issue, which is a mistake because, as I pointed out, free software does offer certain advantages which proprietary software cannot offer. And so software deserves to be, very clearly, to be an issue because software is, you know, it's a central component of information and communication technologies. It serves as an interface between man and machine, and software controls data flows, and therefore it also controls, to a certain extent, human behavior. So, but when it comes to this digital divide debate, people just don't have software on their agenda, and this situation is having a lot to do with this virtual and technological character of software. So the activists I talked to, they said that it's not so easy to explain to someone who lacks a technological background just to explain this issue or the concept of source codes and all these things. And the main or the most important point here is that software is not just about code, but it's about right, control, and freedom, security, and power relations, all these things.
Yeah. Just a remark. Microsoft wasn't only there first. Yeah. I think the problem is that their distribution people have know how to influence the decision makers in corporations.
Yeah, that's... All right, yeah, that's a very important point because, you know, when it comes to policy issues, you have lobbyism. So as it is in this world, it is not that, you know, the best ideas or the best software model succeeds, but it's very often, you know, who has resources to pay the best lobbyists, and they have the ears of the politicians. So that is another very big problem, right? Okay, so why is free software open source not mainstream? We have economical and cultural reasons for the situation as well, because free software open source does not fit into classic economy, and it does not fit into classic value systems. And this has to do with the fact that free software or free code, that is a phenomenon with a lot of different aspects and size. So because it can be commercial, it can be non-commercial, and it is developed by individuals that are scattered all around the world, and they still work together. And then you have large corporations involved, but often you do not have regular superiors. And for outside